Good evening and welcome to the 122nd commencement exercises for Montgomery Catholic High School. For the presentation of the graduates, Mr. Faustin Weber, Principal, Montgomery Catholic High School.
Archbishop Lipscomb, Superintendent Byrd, ladies and gentlemen, I now call forward those students who have completed the requirements for graduation as set forward by Montgomery Catholic High School, the Archdiocese of Mobile, and the state of Alabama. Gina Maria Villardo. Karen Marie Martin. Beatrice Charmaine Lee Mosier. Crystal Marie Hill. Cecilia Deza Martinez Wingard. Stephanie Lynn Behrens. Carrie Murphy. Georgina Melissa Baker. Anna Christina Catrazzula. Lauren Gretcher Becker Edie. Jennifer Alethea Varley. Marie Elizabeth Hunker. Amy Marie Chalker. Melissa Dawn Boyer. Priscilla Tilley. Jennifer Nicole Harris. Tony Nicole Boudreau. Maggie Melissa Monroe. Noelle Marie Hugh Amon. Marie Blanche Vircher. Cassidy Elizabeth Hethcox. Bradley Edward Harris. Stephen Daniel Forche. John Hyung Chang Cook. Matthew Francis Garcia. Jeffrey Paul Baranco. Anthony Joseph Donatelli Jr. Charles Henry Yaley. Neil Russell Bell. Joshua Dow Warren, William Vincent Cornell, Jacob Paul Odom, Joseph Gregory Walker, Jr., John Patrick Wood, Michael Douglas Reardon, Jonathan Thomas Hethcox, Patrick John Lyons, David Humes Mann, Joseph Lee Watley, Jr., Edward Richard Kamenek, Timothy James Clifford, Robert Gregory Beard, Benjamin Paul Rousseau, Joseph Gordon Gaston, Brian Matthew Schroll, Roy Shepard Morris, Jr., Matthew Morgan Glaze, Daniel Johnston, ladies and gentlemen, the 122nd graduating class of Montgomery Catholic High School.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the salutatory address, Mr. Daniel Johnson.
Archbishop, parents, friends, and fellow graduates. I was sitting in the baccalaureate mass last night, listening to Father Stranger's homily, and I still had no idea what I was going to say tonight. I was dreading having to write this speech. I kept thinking, I'm done with school, I finished my exams, why should I have to do something else? But deep down, I knew I had to write it. And for some reason, while I was sitting there thinking those thoughts, the parable of the two sons came to my mind. Most of you are probably familiar with this story from Matthew's Gospel. In the parable, Jesus asks, "What is your opinion? A man has two sons. He came to the first and said, 'Son, go out and work in the vineyard today.' He said in reply, 'I will not,' but afterwards changed his mind and went. The man came to his other son and gave the same order. He said in reply, "Yes, sir," but did not go. Which of the two did his father's will? They answered, "The first." Sitting there in church, I realized that I was acting a lot like the first son. I didn't feel like that was necessarily a good thing, though. My mind kept going with this line of thought, and I started thinking that our whole class this year could be related to the parable of the two sons. Instantly, names started popping into my head of other people from the senior class that could be characterized by the first son. David Mann was one of the first. As Mr. Weber found out this year, David loves to argue. He holds rigidly to his own ideas, almost to the point of being defiant. But in the long run, David is a very friendly, generous person. He gives a lot of himself to others, as he proved this year by becoming an Eagle Scout. Joseph Walker was the next obvious example. Joseph protested loudly and passionately about half of the assignments that came our way this year. But in the end, you could count on him to complete the assignment and do it well. Many of us, the class of 1997, are like this. Openly resistant at first, sometimes just for the fun of it, but finally committed to action and to success. Not everyone is like that, I realized. Trying to finish the analogy, I looked at the second son, who said he would go work in the vineyard and then didn't do it. After thinking about it, I decided that he wasn't a good characterization of anyone in our class. So I made a few minor adjustments to the parable. In our class, the second son is the son who tells his father that he will go to work in the field, and then goes out and does it immediately. Marie Vercher and Vince Cornell are two prime examples of this quality. Marie does everything with energy and determination, so much so that she can even push some of the first sons into doing things quickly. She takes responsibility on herself and works to get things accomplished. Vince, on the other hand, works from a strong sense of duty and honor. He has the willpower to make himself do things because he feels that it is his duty to do them. Both motivations are very noble, and Vince and Marie are not the only ones who work that way. On the whole, the class of 1997 breaks up into these two groups. Some are like the first son, and the rest are like my slightly edited version of the second son. The common thread here is that both groups, in the end, get things done. We don't have anyone like the son in the story who said yes, sir, and then didn't do it. Our class, both as a unit and as individuals, is a class of achievers. And it is for this reason that I am confident that we, the 122nd graduating class of Montgomery Catholic High School, will bring forth incredible contributions to our communities as we enter the world of adult responsibilities that Father Schrenger spoke of last night. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the valedictory address by Mr. Joseph Walker.
Archbishop, parents, friends, and graduates of the class of 1997. We have come here today to acknowledge the past 4 years, but also to look ahead to the future of Catholic High, our own individual futures, and the future of our class. Looking back, we have much to be thankful for. Our parents have made sacrifices in order to provide us this Catholic education, which will benefit us greatly in coming years. Our teachers have cared enough about us and our futures to make personal sacrifices, to go out of their way to provide individual assistance, attention, and leadership. And we also have each other to thank. We as a class have supported one another throughout our 4 years here at Catholic High. The common thread between our class, our families, and our faculty is caring support. And now the caring support we have been provided by others must strengthen us for the journey ahead. We all seem to be off to a great start. It is hard for me to make any kind of sweeping generalization of our class as a whole. It's hard for me to draw any analogy about our class that takes in the many diverse and vibrant personalities. So I won't try to do that. What I can say about our class is that we have accomplished a lot and learned a lot here at Catholic High. We've learned that even when your class is bordering on bankruptcy, you can rally together, sell some fruit, and still make it to Mobile. Our football team has taught us that it's completely possible to beat MA 3 years in a row. Through working together both in and out of school, we've learned that most of our preconceived notions about other people disappear once we get to know them. We've learned Dr. Doyle gets really mad when you push him in a pool. We've learned to apply Coach Arbin's economic principles to some of life's tougher questions, like, what's the best fast food value? My answer, Taco Bell. And we've taught one another that even when you don't agree with someone, you can still work together and get the job done. We've applied these lessons in one way or another in every class project, every club activity, and every game we've played in, nearly always with great success. So with the kind of momentum we've established here at Catholic and the support from each other and our families, we probably couldn't stop if we wanted to. That is what ensures me our class will have continued success long after tonight. So with confidence, we look ahead into the future and find new goals to be achieved, new obstacles to be overcome. My only advice is for us to recognize the greatness each and every one of us has been given by God, cultivated by our families, and brought to full fruition by our own efforts. With that knowledge in mind, may we never settle for less than the greatness all of us deserve, and that we continue to give our best to everything we do. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the address to the graduates by Mr. Faustin Weber and Dr. Thomas Doyle.
Before we begin the address to the graduates, I would like to acknowledge the foundation of why we are here. 122 years ago, Sisters of Loretto came to Montgomery and established a school. And it was their courage and vision which brings us here tonight. And after this year, for the first time, Sister Martha, who was retiring, the last of the sisters will leave. She came either with that first band or shortly thereafter, I've forgotten which. But I would like to acknowledge, Sister, if she would stand please, it is the sisters who have brought us to where we are tonight. A prayer for this night. Lord, forgive us for what we are about to do. Scripture notes your invitation. Suffer the little children to come unto me. Mr. Weber and I have often wondered what your thoughts were about the 10 years following childhood. We have diligently searched and finally found in apocryphal books the prophetic words, "Suffer when they become adolescents and then come unto you." Tonight, Lord, we come to you full of contrition and sorrow for what we intend to do. We will not again turn the other cheek. Using half-truths and fictions, we intend to misrepresent this class to the best of our ability, just as they have so often misrepresented us. Charming though they are, we bear bruises from charges of unfairness and too much work, from excuses of gum helps me relax, and I was only a few minutes late. Tonight we launch our crusade to recapture the trinity of values: truth, justice, the American way, the firm foundation of all teachers. Let us begin the recapture.
Cassidy Hethcox. Cassidy checks out of Catholic High School more than she checks in, and has the distinction of being the first part-time student in Catholic High history to receive a full-time diploma. Rumor has it she wants to attend Ole Miss, join a Southern sorority, dress in hoop skirts, and sip mint juleps all day long, and register as one of the Daughters of the Confederacy. In other words, completely change her identity. Chuck Yaley. Not to be confused with Chuck Yeager, the pilot, who is best known for setting the land speed record at something like 700 miles per hour. Chuck has frequently imagined himself as Chuck Yeager, however, in the Catholic High parking lot. Just ask Lee Stuckey. Somehow, next year without Chuck, I imagine the hallways of Catholic High a much quieter place and our parking lot much safer.
John Cook. One day during calculus class, I pointed out to John that Oriental students in San Francisco, in admissions to Harvard, and in nearby universities excelled in math and science. I said that often universities had two grading systems, one for Oriental students and another for plain old American students, and that I was thinking of doing exactly the same thing. John panicked, but then began to like the idea. Several weeks later, after school one day, I saw that Coach Arbin had John and was at Gina Villardo picking up paper from the library floor. I walked over to let Coach know of the higher standard of excellence which John now demanded in all that he did. Whereupon Coach said that in order to support these higher standards, he would get down on his hands and knees to inspect the floor in the area that John was responsible for cleaning up. John did not seem entirely appreciative of my efforts on his behalf. John, along with Mike Reardon, Gordon Gaston, and Priscilla Tilley, were a team in the stock market game for economics class. Coach had promised an A to any team that scored in the top 30 statewide and who could justify their weekly decisions in writing. This particular team came in 16th in the state, and I could not figure out how. I taught John and Mike, and I knew that they had just guessed in making their weekly decisions to buy and sell stock. Gordon was a possible reason, but then someone told me that he just said whatever came to his head. I saw Priscilla working the internet one afternoon in the library, but she said that she was simply trying to figure out what they had done and then make it make sense. Only recently did I discover the real reason for the success of this team. They had a shrewd financial analyst who advised them week by week, but who did not want to receive any public recognition. Did you all ever thank Jeff Baranko for keeping you on the winning track?
Noelle Amon. Noelle is last of the three Amon girls who have graduated from Catholic High School. She will go down, no doubt, as the most photographed, videotaped person in the history of Catholic High, given her father's penchant for chronicling the family history. Here he is again tonight. Interesting side note to this, Hugh is listed as an oral historian. Anyway, Noelle follows her two older sisters as graduates from Catholic High School, as different from them as she is different from any of her classmates. Quiet, shy, retiring, at least around the school, though she does share the family trait of height, much to the pleasure of all of her coaches. Lauren Eady. In 2 years, with incredible finesse, this girl has managed to avoid every single class that both I and Dr. Doyle teach. And I keep hearing good things about her from the other teachers. They keep telling me that she was a wonderful addition to the class, and if smiles mean anything, Lauren, I'd have to agree.
Melissa Boyer, otherwise known as Miss Boyer, compliments of Jake. Melissa began the year as a gentle, quiet, and courteous young woman. Dealing with the overwhelmingly male calculus and physics classes and determined to hold her own, Melissa became assertive. In her physics write-ups during fourth quarter, I would read that what she had just written was the way that it was, and if I didn't understand it, that was my problem, and I better get on the stick and learn my physics. A far cry from September. Did I hear correctly that she was learning to wrestle alligators in preparation for her upcoming trip to the Amazon?
Charmaine Mosier. This is interesting. I think I saw Charmaine in my office more as a freshman or sophomore than any other graduate graduating tonight. And if she wasn't in my office, she was doing time for Miss Sadie in her room. And then a wonderful thing happened. She disappeared forever from my office. She stopped getting time and started becoming a student. Here she is tonight, dressed in blue. Charmaine, you have a good mind, only recently tapped. We expect big things from you. Crystal Hill. Crystal was voted by her teachers as among the hardest working students in her class. When she won that award at senior day, I looked over at her mother, whose expression seemed to say, if Crystal is the hardest working student, then this class must be the laziest one going. Actually, that wasn't her expression. It was one of a mother's pride which is deserved. Ask any teacher who the most likely student in the class is to be at the tutorials, they will say instantly Crystal, a real testimony to her hard work recognized by all.
Daniel Johnston. This year we had 3 ideal graduates, and Daniel was one of them. Here is a man who has worked for Habitat for Humanity, served at soup kitchens, trained as a youth leader, a voice of balance and reason at all times, Mr. Peace and Justice of the class. At senior retreat, I was sitting on a bench overlooking the lake and reading some papers when I and my papers were splashed with a water balloon from the balcony above. I went immediately upstairs to find only 3 people in the room, Daniel being the one I least suspected. Blandly, with not a flicker of an eye or a quaver of the voice, he led me to believe that he knew nothing about it. Oh, what webs we weave.
Brad Harris. Brad has made his mark on the baseball field at Catholic High School. I understand talking to his parents that he, Brian Schroll, Davey Tyner, Jake Odom, and Jeff Baranko comprised the coach pitch infield must have been about 11 or 12 years ago, as if it were yesterday. Brad is about the nicest guy you'll meet, but he'll con you into believing he's much dumber than he really is if that means he can get out of work somehow. I found this out when it became a matter of Brad losing his eligibility for baseball if his grades didn't improve in my class, and miraculously he began to ace every quiz. Jennifer Harris. No doubt we will see Jennifer next to Michael Johnson and Gary Payton on a Nike commercial one day. You know the commercial where they're all in group therapy session and Michael is saying, I ran past a little boy the other day and he said, Mommy, why is that man all a blur? Why can't they accept me for the real me? Watching Jennifer on the baseball field, or the softball field, I should say, or the basketball courts, you would hardly guess this is the same girl who moseys slowly from class to class, or has to pull herself up in the morning to be on time for school. She leads the class in tardies. In fact, she came in about a half an hour early today for the graduation. They were supposed to be here at 6:30. She showed up at 6. She said, see, Mr. Weber, I'm here early. I said, you thought you had to be here at 6, didn't you? And she started laughing. That was absolutely nailed.
Neil Bell. I think that many of us are aware of the literary style of writing known as stream of consciousness. Whatever occurs to the mind, as disjointed as it may be, is told until eventually the whole story emerges in bits and pieces. I have never had a student try to do physics that way before. Neil mastered the technique of giving bits and drabs of physics concepts that might or might not apply to the problem at hand. I think of Neil fondly as the William Faulkner of physics. David Mann. David was the person who 3 or 4 times a week set up the physics video discs for me, my technology man. These are wonderful 3 to 4 minute demonstrations of good physics experiments, and often I turn the sound off and have the students tell me what they see and what the physics behind it is. Several years ago, a class dubbed these the Charlie Chaplin quizzes. I picked David because he is an honorable man, an Eagle Scout. Several times, one or another of the students would try to get David to put one on and turn the sound on when I was out of the room. Tempted, he never gave in that I know of.
Maggie Monroe. I think that when Maggie steps up to the mound in softball about 20 feet away from the batter or something like that, she's good for about 5 strikeouts per game just out of sheer intimidation. Her boyfriend Lee is the strongest kid in the school. He recently set the Catholic High record for bench press, but the smart money says that Maggie wins every argument. Am I right, Maggie? Karen Martin. Karen has been the most well-traveled of our seniors, having lived in Saudi Arabia in I think something like 49 out of the 50 states of the Union. I can only speculate that such a travel record has fostered, no doubt, her quiet demeanor, her soft southern charm, her easy smile, her demure, I'm sorry, I was talking about Amy Chalker. Actually, Karen was a great addition to the class this year. I was impressed how quickly she became part of the class and became friends with all of her classmates. No doubt a credit to her and to her class.
Cecilia Wingard. Miss Wingard, the most often used phrase in calculus class. Cecilia's exuberant, continually smiling or laughing, always working, and therein lies the problem. She works while I'm explaining. Now, as a teacher, it's fair to get irritated with a student who asks for the same explanation a second or a third time because they were thinking of other things the first time around. But you cannot get irritated with Cecilia. She really was working hard. So the alternative? Miss Wingard, repeated 5 times a class period to bring her back to attention.
Amy Chalker. Amy's all those things I just mentioned, but don't mistake that southern gentility for a person without a sharp mind and some very definite opinions. She would rarely vocalize these opinions in class, but would do so often on papers, and there was always a certain perceptiveness to her sharp comments. As a teacher, that's always something I appreciated about Amy. John Hethcox. John is about as dyed-in-the-wool Republican as you could possibly be at the age of 18. I think he's a member of the Young Republicans Club. I think he even helped on some campaigns. He has a bumper sticker on his car. I know this because the Hethcox's car has occupied my parking place for a month now. I'll be so glad to see the Hethcoxes graduate. The bumper sticker says, "Clinton happens." In fact, you'd be... In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find in John anything that could be considered remotely a liberal attitude. Until, I understand, John went down in January with a Southern literature class to Bourbon Street. In the presence of the Archbishop, in the presence of the superintendent, in the presence of all those here, propriety demands I say nothing further.
Ed Komanek. Ed is very precise and orderly in his ideas. His physics write-ups were absolutely correct. No detail was left out, and he was one of the few who completely understood the practical side of the experiments. Earlier, when we had discussed motors and cars, Ed had a wealth of practical knowledge. Can it really be true, then, that Ed had to park 6 blocks from St. Peter's last night because he does not know how to parallel park? Anna Cutrazula. Anna has a remarkable ability to mentally drop in and out of physics class and yet always know what she's supposed to know. She is also a master gum chewer, hard to catch, but instantly guilty when you do. One night, with several at my house, I casually happened to look at Anna, and she immediately got up to go get rid of her gum. Was it also Anna where I first heard Tony's mimicry? At night, I always walked the girls to the door and watched them get into their cars. Busy one night, I asked Tony to accompany Anna. I then heard him say, "Tell your parents hello for me," which is my parting request to all students as they leave.
Melissa Baker. Two things about Melissa. She has quietly, over the course of her 4 years, earned the respect of her teacher as a hard worker and a nice young woman. And second, I think Melissa has the new Catholic High record for missing the most number of tests on test day due to excused absences in a 4-year career. Now, she always made them up in a timely fashion, but these two facts of the teacher's respect and the number of missed tests existing side by side must really say something good about Melissa. Matt Glaze. Matt was driving me crazy about 35 minutes ago. Big country. Matt loves this image. He cultivates it by wearing cowboy hats, boots, listening to country music, talking in a long southern drawl. But how many cowboys do you know that live in Arrowhead neighborhood and carry around a Franklin Daily Planner? So why the act? I've been trying to figure this out now for some time. I believe that Matt realizes that the country act gets him a lot of mileage with the younger ladies of Catholic high school, who swoon over him in his rugged southern boy charm. No doubt it says something about Allison then that lately Matt has become a one-woman man.
Carrie Murphy. The involuntary swimming episode mentioned by the valedictorian began when I was sitting with a group of the parents and heard this warm, enthusiastic invitation from a group of the guys to come over here a minute, Doc. No way. The next ploy was to send Miss Murphy, whom I had always thought of as belonging to the non-scoundrel side of the class, to invite me over. With wide-eyed innocence and in her gentlest voice, "Doc, they want you to come over there for a minute." Having just watched The Odyssey last week, my first thought was that Carrie should have been cast for the role of one of the sirens who tried to lure Odysseus to his fate. Such sweetness. Brian Schroll. Recently, Kristen Sadie, who taught many of these students as freshmen and who is now in graduate school at Notre Dame, emailed me asking about my definition of Southern hospitality. I responded that we walk slowly, we talk slowly, and we think slowly. And that is what allows us to savor life and people. Now, Sid and Shay, Brian's parents, are two of the most hospitable people I know. They savor life slowly. Brian, however, I don't think has yet swallowed the first sip. We are talking slow moving, not lazy. In calculus class, Brian is the only student that I have ever taught who has managed to make his desk and the concrete block wall into a hammock. With his calculus book resting on his stomach, his head against the concrete block wall, and his eyes absolutely level with the desk, the notebook, and the pencil. He couldn't believe that I was going to make him sit up to actually do his work.
Stephanie Behrens. About May 1st, the principal of Catholic High gets very fidgety about all the various things that need to be done before graduation, much of which is the senior president's responsibility. So Stephanie and I met on May 1st. "Okay, Stephanie, you need to send out invitations to Mrs. Bird and the bishop." "Done," she said. You need to get the complete list of prophecies, remember whens, and last wills to Coach Arbin for editing. On the way, she said. You need to get the readers, the altar boys, the petitioners, the song leaders, the musicians for baccalaureate, and get those to Mrs. Hayden. For sure I had her there. We're almost done with that, she said. You need to give us the program for graduation, then I said. Done, she said. Does anyone realize all the things that the senior class president does for the class these last few months? Right in the middle of everything. Stephanie has made this week a pleasure for me. My thanks to Stephanie for outstanding leadership and service to her class. Tony Boudreau. One of the things I've noticed about Tony, who has also steadfastly avoided taking mine or Dr. Doyle's classes, is that whoever she's around, they seem to be smiling. Tony is often smiling too. That seems to me to be, most of the time, her natural state. Now, there are other days. I did notice that Tony was voted one of the class favorites, and it doesn't surprise me at all.
Jeff Baranco, the second of our ideal graduates. My golf game is a combination between golf, croquet, and skeet shooting, with an occasional well-hit ball, many balls rolling along the ground, and wild balls that can go in any possible and dangerous direction. Jeff and I are supposed to play on Wednesday because Jeff told me that he is equally bad, has only played a couple of times, none recently, and we wouldn't embarrass each other. Yesterday, I happened to be at his cousin Brian's house for dinner when the phone rang, and Brian comes back to say that Jeff wanted to go out and play 9. I said, "What?" He said, "Oh yeah, we've gone hitting several times in the last couple of weeks." I am taking the ideal graduate plaque back and having large X's put through the names of Daniel and Jeff. There is no honor left in this generation. Mike Reardon. Mike would come to my house to study physics and would invariably complain about the Mozart or Haydn or Beethoven that was on the CD player. He even insisted that I listen to one of his CDs, which I did. About 6 weeks ago, I came to school late on a Wednesday morning, faculty meeting day when the students also come in late. Waiting for the light at Vaughan and the bypass, I glanced at the car next to me, and it was Mike. I was listening to Carl Haas, who is playing Italian opera, and Mike is beating exactly the same time with his hands on the steering wheel, and his mouth is singing the Italian words to the same opera which is on. I found out the real truth. Mike, you can come out of your classical closet now.
Danny Forche. There was an incident in the boys' bathroom back a few years ago, and the rumor going around the school was that Danny was responsible. His father, Mike, assured me that Danny couldn't have possibly been that person because Danny was far too much of a neat freak when it came to his personal appearance to have been involved. I now know Danny and understand exactly what his father meant. Danny has looked good for 4 years at Catholic High School, whether that's the way he wears his uniform in football, out on the links, or around the school. I won't count shirt tails. Gordon Gaston. I was telling Gordon before graduation, I think I earned in high school about the equivalent of $300. I think I worked 1 hour a week at McDonald's whenever they wanted to empty out the grease vats. That is why I have enormous respect for Gordon, who has not only worked hard enough to buy his own truck, he's the only person in the school that I've known over the last 8 years since I've been a principal who has paid for his own education at Catholic. Now that is really impressive, very impressive. My hat's off to you, Gordon.
Patrick Lyons. Last fall, I went on a trip with Mr. Conway and several students to New Orleans. We toured Tulane University, and as we walked through the nearby neighborhoods, I commented on the wonderful pastel-colored houses and the vivid, rich homes in the area. I asked Patrick which house he liked. None of them. Finally, he pointed out this gray, bland house and said, "That one." From then on, I have publicly characterized him as a gray man with a gray personality, of gray attitudes, with gray ethics, even while he pointed out to me that he was a man of impeccable integrity. It was in a Baltimore restaurant on our Washington trip that Patrick, the gray man of integrity, disappeared amidst streaks of scarlet words. After dinner, in order to get a free dessert and have the waiter sing to me, he informed the waiter that it was my birthday, my 72nd birthday. And wasn't I well preserved to be the grandfather, or was it the great-grandfather, of these 6 fine young men? I have learned since to read the vivid color beneath the gray surface. What a scoundrel.
Marie Hunker. Poor Marie, she informed me on Friday in her meek, genteel way that the school had completely botched her college announcement. First of all, we called her by her little sister's name, Emily. And secondly, we called her school, this is in the Nightline, Sweatbriar and not Sweetbriar. Marie has been for 4 years one of those blessedly quiet, dignified young ladies moving their way through Catholic high school. We will miss her. Shep Morris. Based on the way that Shep drives his motorcycle, when he fulfills his lifelong dream and becomes a commercial airline pilot, I want to know the name of the airline so I can invest heavily in the competition. Or to put it better, as Joe Walker put it in the class prophecies, in the year 2010, Shep becomes another reliable value jet pilot. Shep's usual way of learning something new is to crash and burn first. I'm not sure that makes a good airline slogan.
Tim Clifford. There's a fundamental principle in physics, the second law of thermodynamics, which says that the universe tends toward disorder, and that whenever order occurs, it is at the expense of even greater disorder. Tim is a perfect example of this principle. In a 50-minute period with 6 problems assigned, Tim will shift and shuffle in his desk, move papers back and forth, stare off into space, put his head down, and finally, with 10 minutes left in the class, get to work. And then the next day turn in beautifully ordered work. Ben Russo. If Neil was the Faulkner of physics, Ben is the Hemingway. Simple declarative sentences with everyday words are the hallmark of Ben's paper. In the same unadorned way, Ben has a genuine sense of generosity in helping others. How many in the class have benefited from Ben helping them put in a CD player? An offer extended to me as well. A spirit certainly not in keeping with those so anxious to help me swim.
Jenna Varley has perfected the art of pretending not to understand anything you've said so as to get exactly what she wants. She smiles blankly at you, sweet talks you into all the reasons she can't do her time that day, or why she was late, or why an assignment isn't in, and you find yourself nodding your head sympathetically. And as she walks away, you wonder if you've just been scammed, and you probably have. Gina Villarda. I had Gina in my first period class this quarter. At least I think so. At one point, I wasn't sure she hadn't transferred to Mrs. Hartman's religion class. I saw her so little. But then when I gave out finals, she was there and she did well. Makes you wonder what good a teacher is.
Jake Odom, a man of style under the worst of conditions, even when the baseball team was practicing mudslides. Players dive headfirst into mud and slide to the base. I have a picture of Jake with his face covered in mud, with a perfect picture smile and a head at exactly the right angle for the camera. How do you do that? I signed my formal name as Thomas L. Doyle, and the L drove Jake crazy. What was it? He pestered me for weeks. So finally one night when he was at the house working on calculus or physics, he saw my wallet, looked at my social security card, and triumphantly announced my middle name. What he didn't and doesn't know is that I set him up. It was a computer-generated card. What does that L stand for, Jake?
I wouldn't believe him. Bobby Beard. Lest anyone think that students in parochial schools are clones of one another, I offer them Bobby Beard. There's no one in the world like Bobby. How many people do you know would get up in front of the whole school and do a bongo solo? How many people do you know are 6 foot 3 inches tall and weigh what, about 60 pounds? Bobby, in the words of the latest commercials, eat something. Marie Vircher. Marie is a woman of many talents, not the least of which is her voice and artistic abilities. She completes a long line of virtues who have graduated from Catholic high school. The only girl, I might add, amongst 3 older brothers. Marie can be as sweet as an angel, but perhaps it is growing up with only boys that has toughened Marie up as a person not to be brooked if she gets her gander up. If looks could kill, the principal of Catholic high school would have been roadkill along the various path of Marie's matriculation many times over the course of the 4 years. Josh Warren. You can't say enough good things about Josh, so I won't bother to say anything good about him at all. This guy has developed, to an art form, the ability to sweet-talk the female teachers of Catholic High. "Oh, he's such a gentleman," I've heard him say. He gives them that sheepish smile of his, just like the one he has on now, and all the world is at his command. Josh is the female equivalent of Jenna Varley in the class.
Vince Cornell. Disillusioned with our first 2 ideal graduates, I am willing to suspend judgment on Vince, our third. I have given the engraver instructions to put a question mark after his name rather than an X. Vince, in the senior retreat water balloon attack, which turned into not 5, not even 10, but 15 brave students against one beleaguered teacher, Vince fed me filled balloons for the counterattack. Vince turned in the most imaginative physics write-ups I've ever gotten, from Einstein and Lorentz being pulled over for speeding and pointing out in their defense that all speed was relative, to Millikan's quantum mechanics and auto body parts shop, all with the physics absolutely correct. Vince despaired at my abysmal ignorance when he found out that I had never seen the Star Wars trilogy, the mythology of our times, as he said, and insisted that I do so. I have now seen them, and suggest that others here may benefit from Vince's persistence. Archbishop, have you seen the Star Wars trilogy? I can't believe it! I thought I had you another victim, Vince.
Lee Watley. I saw Lee last night in a suit and tie, and I watched him for a few minutes and started to laugh. It was like he had a rash. Lee is a moose of a kid, the strongest student in the school, but also one of the nicest people you're likely to meet. Earlier this year, I called Lee to the office, and he came with a sense of urgency. "What did I do, Mr. Weber?" The voice of a guilty man. I shook his hand and said, "Congratulations." He shook it, still in the dark. "Have you seen your latest ACT score?" I showed it to him, and Lee broke out in the toothiest grin I think I've ever seen. Lee had earned that score, and he knew it, and he couldn't help himself. John Wood. There are 2 things you need to know about John, and I've come to understand that they both work to his advantage. First, John is about as likable a guy as you will ever meet. Everyone likes John. Affable, personable, inoffensive, a good listener, you name it. The second thing is John has, without a doubt, the worst handwriting in the school, even worse than Dr. Doyle's. And here's how they work together. John turns in a B-level essay on a test to the teacher. No way can the teacher read it. It's hopeless. So your first instinct as a teacher is to give it back to him and say, "Unreadable, no B." But since John is such a great guy, you feel like a heel doing that, so you end up staring at it for about 20 minutes, going cross-eyed. And then, just like looking at those 3-dimensional magic eye art posters, you begin to convince yourself you are seeing elements of the right answer. And eventually you give John his B. That's a great scam you got going there, John.
Matt Garcia. I watched Matt pitch about 4 games this year. I had already seen a Trinity pitcher whose ball was so fast that I could not really even see it. Without my glasses, I could see Matt's fastball. Why couldn't the batters hit him? And they couldn't. He had something like a 6-1 record for the year. I finally realized that his slow delivery and sly smile combined to make him a scam artist pitcher. he'd sort of promise the batter one pitch and then give him another one. Same thing in the classroom. Once a teacher recognized that you had to make Matt deliver the pitch that he promised, he was a great student to have in class.
Priscilla Tilley. An interesting statistic at Catholic High this year, perfectly true, is that we are 60% male and only 40% females. Rumor has it that those numbers went up when the 3 Tilley girls were enrolled at Catholic High School. But it's not just Priscilla's beauty that attracts attention. She has a good mind, makes good grades, and is a wonderful young lady. We're sorry that the Tilleys are going back to Chile next year, and apparently so are the guys. Projections for next year indicate that we will only be 53% male.
Joseph Walker. I am offering for sale, cheap, my armored vest. With Joseph gone, I will no longer have to endure 6 to 8 barbs per class. I grant him the best wit in years. I also grant him that he won most of the daily battles. For example, on the last day of class, in a hurry, I told him, no questions. From Joseph, 3 minutes later as we were reading, what does toroidal mean? Without thinking, I answered with the immediate rejoinder. You answered a question. He mocked me. However, I and Tani Donatelli will claim victory for the year. During January, I taught a class of 6 boys. Our subject was the Federalist Papers. In addition to several outstanding speakers, including the former mayor of Mobile, Joe Langdon, the boys were paired off to create a government. I took 3 countries from the internet, disguised them, and then required the 3 teams to create several articles of a constitution. I promised them a tough problem to solve that would have to pass muster politically and in accord with their constitution. Joseph and Daniel had a country with 99% one religion and 6 states. They established a monarch with all authority vested in him. He was the commander-in-chief, the dispenser of all revenues, the chief justice of the Supreme Court. I then required the teams to swap constitutions and try to solve the problem using only the words of the Constitution and the political realities of the disguised country. Now, Tony and Vince got Joseph's and Daniel's constitution, and in the 2-hour block I gave them to solve the problem, they spent a bare 10 minutes in gleefully describing what the monarch would unilaterally do to solve the problem. They didn't have to worry about politics. The monarch would do it. Having scrutinized the Constitution the night before, merely for the pleasure of trying to catch Joseph, I pointed out a problem. One article reserved all powers not specifically granted to the monarch to the 6 states, and there was no article actually giving the monarch any powers. He was commander-in-chief, but had no power to raise an army. He dispensed all revenues, but he had no power to levy taxes. Joseph, outraged, tried to argue that authority implied power. Tony and Vince, at first in despair, did a creditable job in solving the problem. But the best line of the year came on our trip to Mobile to hear Mayor Langdon. One team pointed out the name of a truck we were passing. The Grand Executive was a perfect vehicle for their Grand Executor Administrator in their Constitution. Without missing a beat, Tony immediately pointed to a second truck we were passing and said, "Yeah, and there's the perfect vehicle for Joseph and Daniel's king." It was a Golden Flake potato chip truck. From that point on, we referred to their king as the Golden Flake. I would like to close with the words of an Irish blessing. May God bless those who love us, and those who don't love us, may He turn their hearts. And if He doesn't turn their hearts, may He turn their ankles, so we'll know them by their limping. Thank you. You've been a wonderful class, an absolutely marvelous experience for this year. And God bless you all.
Yes, I limp, but I still love you. Ladies and gentlemen, an address to the graduates by the Most Reverend Oscar H. Lipscomb, Archbishop of Mobile.
Distinguished officials, distinguished guests, but most of all, distinguished graduates. It is your night, and I can only greet you with the appropriate salutation that after that last presentation is left to me. The force be with you all. Once when that was the rage, and coming from a somewhat classical background, I saw a principal who will be nameless and whose name was followed by the small initials DV, which in Latin meant Deo Volante, God willing it. And I thought, how nice that they recognized the principle is God's will, until I found out that DV meant what? Darth Vader. Sister Martha, thank you for being here in so special a manner this evening. It is a particular gift and grace. I looked up the archives in the mid-1870s, and I thought you were among that original group that Bishop Quinlan welcomed from Narings in the Mother House. Your sisters have been a remarkable gift and remain with us, because the fact that physical presence sometimes ceases does not mean that the gifts that they have given will ever disappear. You graduates, I think, have sensed that tonight, that over 4 years you bond with each other. You passed through a very special period in your life. I remember high school as just, without a doubt, some of the most formative years of my life. You grow from a bare impression of, well, maybe the world is, until, wow, look at what the world is. Thank you for growing that way together and for holding each other so close. One of the presentations mentioned that I've forgotten whether it was the salutatorian or the valedictorian, that you cared for each other. That's a nice way to phrase it. I'm afraid I identified more with the salutatorian, who about every Tuesday night, even though I have had more than my share of finishing exams and diplomas, find myself doing the weekly column with that same sense of, will I never get this assignment over in time for press? So it never stops, but it's all worthwhile. Let me leave you with a thought that I shared as the result of a graduation past on this night of so much exuberance and so much joy and so full of thanksgiving in so many ways. And it happened after a graduation. This one was in Mobile, and I came back from the auditorium, and as I was crossing Government Street, or trying to cross Government Street, a lot of traffic, all of ours, there was a car full of graduates. And about 10, 15, maybe 20 feet up from me was an older gentleman who is obviously the father of a graduate. I assume so, because he had in his hand a diploma and a graduate's cap. Unlike Dr. Doyle, he looked maybe in his later years as if he was a graduate's father, not a grandfather. All of a sudden, a car with 4 or 5 young men in it stopped. And he's in the lane closest to me, so it didn't obscure traffic. It just stopped. And one of the graduates got out, and he came over and embraced this gentleman, who embraced him back. Now, he had already said, "Thank you, Dad," because he had his diploma and his cap. And he was going then with the class to celebrate, as is the custom, for so much of a special part of the evening. But as he passed him, waiting there by himself on Government Street, he had them stop the car for one last hug, one last gift of appreciation. I've never forgotten that, because I think it says so much what's in hearts and minds and lives of graduates. And let me leave that with you tonight. Don't forget who gets the first hug, and don't forget who gets the last. Congratulations, and God bless you.